Hey everyone. As you can see from the cinematic portion of the video, I had a really nice time in Ukraine, and I learned a tremendous amount about a culture that was very much different from my own. I spent most of my time in Kyiv and Lviv, though the next time I visit, I'm probably going to spend some time in Kharkiv and Odessa as well, to hopefully learn even more about the country in the future. Ukraine and just Eastern Europe in general is not really a place that many Americans have a chance to visit, so I want to take some time with this video to discuss some of my thoughts on the incredible culture, history, and people in Ukraine, and talk about what makes it so unique compared to the United States and even another Slavic country like Serbia. The first thing I want to talk about is the fascinating architecture in Ukraine, which is as eclectic as it is beautiful. And I think that this is very much reflective of the very diverse historical influences on the country from various neighboring empires through the ages. When I came to Kyiv, I really wasn't sure what to expect. I had read blogs and seen pictures, of course, but it's just not anywhere near the same as walking the streets in person. To be honest, I was expecting a lot more of the clunky Soviet architecture, and for Kyiv to be a lot less beautiful than it actually is. Of course, on the outskirts of Kyiv, there are a lot of blocky and unattractive communist-era buildings, which just are not very inspiring or interesting to look at. However, once you enter the city center, it really becomes very beautiful, not to mention extremely interesting from a historical perspective as well. Kyiv is a tremendously old city, to the point where its early history is still very much debated, though a lot of sources say that the city was founded approximately in the year 482 by the famous brothers Kyiv and their sister. Some of the earliest famous architecture was built by a federation of peoples known as the Kyiv Rus, who were a mixture of Slavic, Baltic, and Finnic peoples. Some famous examples of this really early architecture in Kyiv are the Golden Gate and St. Sophia's Cathedral, both of which were built a little bit more than 1,000 years ago. There are also a lot of beautiful historical buildings that clearly have a lot of influence from Imperial Russia in the 1700s, which includes the famous St. Andrew's Church. Kyiv has been called the City of Domes, and I think that this is a pretty apt title. When I walk the city, I really love seeing the beautiful gold domes of the Orthodox Christian churches everywhere, especially because they are so unique to this part of the world. Also, the gold color is specifically intended to represent the light of God, which I think is very beautiful symbolism. Now, as much as I enjoyed my time in Kyiv, I have to say that I liked Lviv even better. I really cannot say enough good things about Lviv, to be honest. A lot of Ukrainians I spoke to in both Kyiv and Lviv usually describe this city as very cozy and charming, and I think those adjectives are really accurate. From my perspective, I would also add that it is also aesthetic, historic, and culturally rich. If you look into the history, the city is more than 850 years old and has had a lot of different empires that fought for its control, including Poland, Austria, and Hungary. You can see this historical influence in the architecture as you walk the streets, as sometimes you can see a Polish-style building directly next to a building built in the Austro-Hungarian style, next to an Italian-style building. That being said, my general sense of the city was that the strongest overall influence was Austrian. And I say this because I'm actually filming this video in Vienna right now, and as much as I feel like this city lives up to the hype, and it's definitely one of the most beautiful places I have ever been in my life, I have to say that I really feel like Lviv was like a miniature Vienna. Of course, Vienna is much larger and everything is on a much grander scale, but on the other hand, Lviv has a very unique and intimate charm to it, and is also much more affordable. Thus, I really think that Lviv is an oft-overlooked hidden gem, much like Novi Sad in Serbia. If you've had a chance to visit Lviv, feel free to let me know your opinion of the city in the comments. From my perspective, I'd say that Lviv is really a great mixture of beauty, culture, and affordability, and as such, I think this makes it an awesome place for location-independent entrepreneurs, as well as retirees from Western countries. You really get a lot for your dollar in Lviv, and furthermore, I just found it to be a very inspiring place to do creative work, since it is both quiet and beautiful. Lastly, I think that Lviv is also just a great place for ordinary tourists as well, since it is really safe, holds its own against a city as renowned for its beauty as Vienna, and right now is frequently overlooked by most travelers, so it is far from being too touristy for now. The response to my Serbia video was overwhelmingly positive, and I'm so grateful for the support from the Serbian people. Of course, I did receive some criticism from a few Eastern European viewers because I alluded that there's a stereotype that Slavic people are cold. Now, in that video, I also said that from my experiences in Serbia, the Serbian people really did not fit that stereotype at all. And if anything, the Serbian culture seemed more akin to Greek and Italian culture than anything else. So I thought a little bit about these Slavic stereotypes, and I could see why people might be a little upset by them and see them as unfair. It got me thinking about why these stereotypes exist in the first place. And I think that this has a lot to do with the portrayal in the American mainstream media and Hollywood. Almost universally, American movies have depicted Slavic people as the antagonists for decades, and they are usually depicted as cold and emotionless mercenaries of some kind. Obviously, during the Cold War, having villains from the USSR served an obvious propaganda purpose, as you can see from most James Bond films and even the fourth Rocky film.
I must break you.
However, even after the Cold War ended, for whatever reason, tons of movie villains still originate from Slavic countries. Jack Bauer fought Serbian terrorists during one season, John Wick fights the Russian mafia, and even Batman has fought Slavic mercenaries at one point. I'm not sure if this is just lazy writing from Hollywood or what, but it seems that if an American movie needs a villain, the default move is just to point to a random Slavic country. So the question is, do the people in Ukraine fit this Hollywood stereotype of being cold in any way? And if I'm gonna be 100% honest, there is a tiny bit of truth behind the stereotype, and I can see where the stereotype originated from. However, it has obviously been massively over-exaggerated by the Western media. And before anyone gets angry, let me explain further. I would say that about half of the Ukrainian people I met did not fit the stereotype at all, and in fact were just as open and immediately friendly as anyone you would meet anywhere else in the world. As for the other half, I would say that they are a little bit more reserved and cautious than Americans at first. However, once they get to know you a little, they usually lower their guard very quickly. I think that Ukraine is often just not an easy place to grow up, so they need to make sure that you're a good person before they open up to you. I mean, in my experience, you could have the toughest, gruffest looking old Ukrainian dude, and as soon as I would try to have a conversation with him in Russian or Ukrainian, almost always he would laugh at my funny accent and at least smile and be more than happy to have a conversation with me. I would say that just in general, compared to Americans, Ukrainian people are on average tougher on the outside, but they are also very kind-hearted and generous on the inside. And there is a definite plus side to this aspect of Ukrainian culture as well, and that is that Ukrainians are very real, meaning Ukrainians will almost never be fake nice to you. If they don't like you, you'll know. If they're indifferent to you, they're indifferent. And if they're friendly to you, they genuinely like you. And if they ask you questions, it's because they genuinely are interested and not just asking to be polite. Lastly, because of all the negative movie portrayals, a lot of my friends from home were worried about me visiting Eastern Europe, and multiple people told me to be careful. Of course, you have to take common sense precautions no matter where you travel in the world, but on the whole, I found Kyiv and Lviv to both be extremely safe, and I felt perfectly comfortable to walk everywhere carrying fairly expensive camera equipment. So in summary, as far as Slavic stereotypes go in Ukraine, like all stereotypes, there's a tiny bit of truth behind it, but it is just way exaggerated by the mainstream media. Just in the same way that most Americans do not own a house full of guns and most Asians are not math nerds. Mostly.
You notice anything different about him? Look at his face.
That's pretty racist.
Look at his eyes. I'll give you a hint. His name's Yang. He won a national math competition in China. He doesn't even speak English. Yeah, I'm sure of the math.
So next, I want to talk about languages in Ukraine. And as far as languages go, in general, the conventional wisdom is that Lviv and most of Western Ukraine is predominantly Ukrainian speaking, while in Central and Eastern Ukraine, in cities like Kyiv and Kharkiv, the people predominantly speak Russian. I found this to be largely the case in my experiences, though there certainly were a lot of exceptions. Furthermore, while each geographic area has its own language preference, pretty much everyone I met in both Kyiv and Lviv were fluent in both Ukrainian and Russian, and able to switch between them without even thinking, sometimes even in the same conversation. Also, I did not get a chance to visit Odessa, though I was told that they speak their own unique Odessa language, which is a combination of Russian, Ukrainian, and some Yiddish as well. Furthermore, even though the Russian language is much more prevalent in Kyiv, it seemed like in both cities that people are very proud of the Ukrainian language and had a strong preference for teaching me Ukrainian phrases over Russian phrases. So more often than not, when people found out that I want to travel in the future to Minsk, St. Petersburg, Sochi, they were happy to teach me Russian words and phrases, but they would almost always follow it up with teaching me the corresponding Ukrainian words as well. Both languages are, of course, Cyrillic-based, and hence very challenging for a native English speaker. So to say that it was overwhelming is a bit of an understatement. And no disrespect to the Ukrainian language at all, but if I'm being completely honest, I'm just much more interested in learning Russian just because I'd be able to use it in more countries. Furthermore, at this point, I'm still debating whether it's even feasible for me to invest the 12 to 1400 hours needed to become conversational in just Russian, and I really don't think there's any realistic way I'm going to be able to master both. As a quick aside, I actually did take a week of Russian language classes while in Kyiv, and it almost felt like being in Russian grade school in a lot of ways. I definitely found the language to be very tough to learn, and I think a lot of this is because many of the sounds are quite different and don't have a direct English correlate. For example, one of the characters in the Cyrillic alphabet is literally an asterisk and makes a zh sound. So that extra mental step of translating a word from the Cyrillic spelling to a Latin spelling definitely creates another degree of challenge. Thus, the opposite must also be true for people who speak Slavic languages. And so I really do have a respect for people from Eastern Europe who are fluent in English, because as difficult as Ukrainian and Russian are for me, English must be equally difficult for them. And though there isn't much English spoken at all on the outskirts of the cities, in both the city centers of Lviv and Kyiv, I was actually very surprised by how prevalent knowledge of English is. The locals tell me that the percentage of English speakers is way higher in neighboring countries like Poland and Germany. However, I thought it was still pretty good, and it was quite easy to get around. From what I heard before coming to the country, I was expecting almost no one to speak English. However, from my experience, I would say that about half of the people in the city centers know enough English to allow you to order food and get directions and get help if you need it. Furthermore, I would say that about 10 to 15% of the people I encountered in the cities were actually highly fluent in English, enough for you to have a deep conversation with them about topics as complex as history, literature, and geopolitics. And I obviously loved learning the perspectives of people from such a different part of the world regarding these kinds of deeper topics. In the United States, it is relatively uncommon to meet people who speak multiple languages, and so it was quite inspiring for me to meet a sizable number of polyglots while in Ukraine. I made friends with a number of Ukrainians who were simultaneously fluent in Ukrainian, Russian, and English, and in some impressive cases, also Polish and German as well. If you're Ukrainian and watching this video, you're probably one of these people. For myself, though I love the United States and the principles it was built upon, whether I like it or not, our elegant and timeless Constitution is really coming under serious attack. And the US is steadily coming under increasing corporate oligarchic control, including the likes of Wall Street and the military-industrial complex and big tech. Thus, I see my future as a much more sovereign individual, and as such, I am definitely very inspired by the polyglots I've met in Europe, and I think it would definitely be a wise investment to learn an additional language in the coming years, though I still have to think deeply about which ones to commit to. Overall, I think that the Slavic nations have a very bright future. However, given how much more challenging the Slavic languages are compared to languages like Spanish and German, I still have a lot of thinking to do about this. I also have to say that I found Ukrainian cuisine very interesting. It sounds kind of funny, but if I had to succinctly describe what Ukrainian cuisine is like, I would say that it is the type of cuisine I would imagine a European fairy tale hero would eat. I know it sounds a little silly, but let me explain. A lot of Ukrainian cuisine is based on traditional peasant dishes that have been popular through the ages, so there are a lot of colorful stews and meat dishes. So it's just the kind of hearty, traditional European food you can imagine a young hero eating in his cottage after being out on a snowy day, fighting dragons, and going on adventures. I personally really liked the traditional Ukrainian soups. Of course, borscht is made with beets and is very famous worldwide, but I also really liked solanka, which is a meat soup. I also never tried rabbit before coming to Ukraine, but I found that I really like traditional Ukrainian rabbit dishes, as well as their duck and lamb dishes as well. I also really liked Ukrainian dumplings and potato pancakes, which are quite popular among the locals. Another thing I want to mention also is that Ukraine also has some amazing Georgian food. I actually had never previously tried Georgian food before, and I honestly had no idea what Georgian food even was, but I found that I absolutely love it, especially khinkali, which are Georgian soup dumplings, which are actually very similar to Chinese xiaolongbao. Ukraine and Georgia seem to have a very close relationship, and so just like Southern California has awesome Mexican food, Ukraine has some really awesome Georgian food, and thus most Ukrainians are very much connoisseurs of Georgian food. Also, both Kyiv and Lviv have great cafe and coffee scenes. And if you have a chance to visit Lviv, make sure to check out Lviv Coffee Manufacturer and ask to go underground for fire coffee. I'm just gonna say that it's a pretty cool experience you'll wanna check out for yourself. Lastly, as far as cuisine goes, there was really only one thing I really wasn't impressed by, and that was actually the famous barbecue rib place called Ryberna, which is very famous in Kyiv and Lviv. To be fair, I only tried the Ryberna restaurant in Kyiv, but I really wasn't that impressed by it overall, so I didn't try the one in Lviv. Perhaps because it is such a popular tourist spot and I have my expectations too high, and perhaps I'm a bit biased as well as an American, but I really think that the barbecue ribs in Texas and the American South are just way better. Just overall much juicier and more flavorful with better sauces. Of course, this is just my opinion, and if you disagree, before you fight me in the comments, I invite any Ukrainians to come visit the US and try the barbecue in Texas and Tennessee before solidifying your opinion. In the digital age, the world is changing faster than ever before. China is rising to become the dominant global superpower and has its sights on making the yuan the global reserve currency. And the United States is very sadly an empire that's starting to decline, most obviously from a financial standpoint due to the irresponsible monetary policies leading to a weakening dollar, and even more importantly, a weakening middle class and a widening wealth gap. Beyond that, the United States is also suffering in terms of healthcare, education, and just general political division. However, that being said, having made friends with Ukrainians during my travels and learning their life stories, it really has made me much more cognizant of the privileges I have from being an American. If I had to make some general observations regarding the young men and women I met and befriended in Ukraine, I would say that in general, they are very mature beyond their years and have a lot of inner strength as well, and also just a quiet confidence about them. During a conversation I had with a very nice law student whom I met, she said it's because growing up in Ukraine is just not that easy for most people, and people are forced to grow up fast, for better or worse. And talking to my friend Ivan about his childhood, it seems to be very much the case. He grew up in a small town in western Ukraine, and he told me about how when he was growing up, there wasn't enough food in the house often, and if he was hungry, he would just go out to his yard and dig up potatoes to eat. He also talks about having to use a horse-drawn plow to till his fields when he was just a boy. I think this is a lot of the reason why he has a very strong character. He works very hard at his normal job, runs a side business selling family-raised honey, and is working towards starting his own cafes in Lviv, all while learning English to improve his business and networking opportunities. I've never heard him once complain, even though he has a lot he could complain about compared to people growing up in the West. Furthermore, I have to also mention that he gave me an incredibly generous gift, which was a vyshyvanka. This is a traditional Ukrainian shirt, and they are handmade by highly skilled artisans. During the Ukrainian Independence Day, I was going out doing a lot of filming, and I thought it was so cool to see everyone celebrating in traditional Ukrainian clothing while in Lviv. But I never thought I'd get to wear one myself. And so it was just such a meaningful gift, and I was very honored by it, and I won't ever forget that kindness and generosity. And just to go a little further on this topic, I would say that it seemed like many young Ukrainians I met have a very similar mindset to Ivan, and were working hard to learn English and other skills to improve their opportunities in the future. In many ways, the young people in both cities were just, in general, very driven to improve their lives and circumstances, and I really respect that. Meeting these young Ukrainians has just very much reinforced how much gratitude I need to have for the advantages I have for just being an American. It makes me realize how much of a gift it is just to have English as my native language and an American passport, not to mention my American higher education, and just how many global opportunities those gifts bring, and how foolish it would be to not fully leverage those gifts. And with that, thanks so much for watching. Please feel free to browse my catalog of videos and see if you'd like to subscribe. In addition to travel, my videos also cover self-development and a wide range of fascinating topics in a documentary style. But hopefully they're all united by a commitment to quality and excellence. So until next time, Дякую, до побачення, спасибо, до свидания. Take care, everyone.